You're listening to Drop It Like It's Pop.
Drop it like it's pop. I'm Georgie Statius.
And I'm Vicken Karkukli. This is where two lovers of pop culture come together, unfiltered and unedited, to analyze the biggest stories, moments, and yes, controversies the world of pop has to offer from our very special point of view as media professionals and international event experts.
I'm the PR specialist.
And I'm the journalist.
Join us as we agree to disagree and talk pop till we drop.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening.
All of the above.
All of the above.
That's right.
What
It's
time
morning
is it
where
over
you
there?
are.
Sorry?
It's morning where you are.
It is. It is just after 7 a.m. that we're recording.
And it's just after 4 p.m. where I am.
Here we go. I'm enjoying
And
a
who are,
chai.
and who are you?
Oh, who am I? Who am I? I'm Georgie Statius, joining you from Melbourne, Australia.
Hi, everyone. I'm Vicken Karkukli, joining you from Louisville, Kentucky. Yeah, going into this episode, I had the feeling that we should really be calling this coffee and cocktails because we're never going to be in the same time area where you can actually share the same drink.
No, and actually, dear listeners, Vicken and I have actually how long have we known each other?
18 years.
18 years. We've only spent, two and a half weeks in each other's company in person. That's cool.
No, I beg to differ. We spent a month in Qatar,
maybe 5
and then a
weeks.
week together in your lovely hometown of Melbourne,
5 weeks.
Australia.
But that's
where,
pretty good over 18 years.
I know,
It's
right?
a long-distance relationship.
Oh my God. I think it's the longest long-distance relationship I've had. So, well, I do have a question for you, though, because I was talking about drinks. So I should be having probably a bourbon right now because I'm
Okay.
in Kentucky, but you are probably having a morning beverage. What is your morning beverage of choice?
Yes, well, being in Melbourne, it should be a coffee because obviously we're known for our coffee, but it's a chai because I don't drink coffee, a soy chai, and Melbourne has spoiled me for soy chais because when I travel for work, it is very hard to find a chai that's not made from that awful sugary powder business.
Yes.
So there's a couple of places in Sydney and Brisbane and Perth and Adelaide that are my go-tos when I'm there. I was in Singapore recently and found a good chai place. So, yes. So
you could write the traveler's guide to the perfect soy chai.
do you know what? I think I've got a chai radar, and as soon as I get to the coffee shop, I can tell if they're going to have a prana or sticky or fresh chai or if it's a powder.
You know what? I share your aversion for sugary powders, that, the main ingredient being sugar. And I have that issue here in the States whenever I want some matcha. So we are,
Yes.
yeah. So we're not calling the show Flat Whites and Bourbon, are we?
We're not flat whites and bourbon, no.
All right.
What are we calling it?
Well, we're calling it Drop It Like It's Pop. It's episode 4. You should know that by now.
I should know that. Almost
episode
halfway
4.
through season 1.
That's right. Who would have thought episode 4, right?
Who would have thought?
Well, now is the
Listening to us.
perfect. Well, it's the perfect opportunity to thank everyone for their positive feedback and for reaching out and
Yes.
sending messages. And yeah, it's been very nice to see that some people are listening and are interested in our perspectives.
And we like not so good feedback as well, because that's how we learn and grow our little podcast that could.
And there's a very good book actually that I have that's called Thank You for the Feedback, which is a huge kind of book about how to receive feedback that is not always super positive. My friend, one of my friends recommended that book to me, and I bought it. And I mean, I read pieces of it. I didn't read it from start to finish, but very interesting.
That's interesting because there's a YouTube clip that keeps coming up, or I don't know, Instagram or TikTok, something, and it's in a lecture series, and someone gives a compliment and the other person kind of deflects it, and the person giving the compliment said, "You've just disrespected the person who gives a compliment if you just sort of deflect it. So it's a really good lesson in how to sit in a compliment and just allow it. Because as women, we're terrible. If someone comments, oh, lovely shoes, we say, oh, these old things, or, oh, I love your jacket, oh, I got it on sale. Like, we can't just say, oh, thank you.
Right. I've always been one to tell people whenever I pay a compliment, if the person, is close, I will tell them, I wouldn't pay you a compliment if I didn't think it.
Yes.
So, I'm not going out of my way to say something that I don't feel or believe. So, just take it and smile. And that's something that I used to do as well. I would used to say thank you and smile.
I know we're not great at taking compliments. So yes,
that's right.
We won't take your compliments well, but we'll take your constructive feedback well.
Yes, so please continue to reach out. So we really appreciate that. And we have got a good episode, I feel, today.
Dude, tell me more.
Well, today we're going to kind of segue from the previous episode that we did called Comedy, the Injunction to Laugh, and kind of flip the narrative a little and go to the perspective of the person getting the laughs. So really, this one is called Stand-Up Comedy, the Pressure of Being Funny.
Yes.
Very interesting. I mean, we had so much to say last time that we actually thought about it and kind of said, we should actually flip the narrative, take another perspective, and see where we go from there. And I mean, we might repeat a couple of things here and there from the previous episode as like stepping stones to our topic this week. But I'm very interested in this one, and I have heaps of questions for you. So I hope you are ready for that, because you find yourself standing on a stage much more than I do.
I thought you were going to say, because you find yourself very funny.
Well, I find you very funny. I don't know how you find yourself.
No. It's no, I'm really excited about this one. There was something that popped up just recently in the news, which really ties into this episode. So it's quite timely.
Yes. Well, traditions first. Before we talk about this week's episode, we need to go back to the previous episode.
That's right.
With our segment about last time, and see if there's anything about the previous episode that we would like to revisit.
Yes.
Do you have any moments from the previous episode that you'd like to revisit?
I do. I'm sure there's a lot of moments from the last episode I'd like to revisit, but these are probably more clarification and omissions. And the first one, I was talking about the context of sort of writers giving a warm hug to a town or an area they love and a community. And I talked about James Corden and Gavin and Stacey and how he had dated someone in Wales. So his memories of sort of driving across that bridge to Wales. But, of course, I omitted to clarify that Ruth Jones, his co-creator and co-writer, is Welsh, and, of course, has done some fantastic Welsh shows, including Stella, which is a gorgeous show set in Wales, which is, I think, another love letter to that area and that country. So, yes, that would be my clarification, that I sort of omitted that the co-creator of Gavin and Stacey is Welsh herself. And then the second one was I could not think of a phrase, and I kept tripping over it, around standards. And to clarify, the quote I was meaning to say was, the standard you walk past is the standard you accept. So in that context of comedy that's offensive, that's racist, that's sexist, that's discriminatory, all of that, if you laugh, you're accepting that standard. So, but I got myself really tongue-tied with that. So just to clarify, it's the standard you walk past is the standard you accept.
Well, thank you for that clarification. I was also thinking about, we as professionals in the media, event, PR industries, how, and it's a question I've asked you, and it's probably something we're going to have to navigate for the next few weeks, is how personal can we get when we talk about, the topics that we discuss, the anecdotes, because it always ties in with what we do. And I was thinking about how, legitimate we find ourselves to, know what can go on in, behind closed doors of a movie, of a film shoot, or all of those very specific environments. And, it kind of took me back to what I was saying last time of, working in the event industry, we know those environments where everything is more intense than in what we would call, the real life. And, everything is heightened because you spend so much time together and build relationships so much faster and, kind of get to know each other within minutes, hours. And also because you're facing a similar, undertaking or challenge. So we're going to have to navigate that interesting line of how personal can we get with our anecdotes, because we spoke about the relationship between humor and comedy and sometimes bullying or being very pointing fingers and
Yes.
calling people out and putting people on the spot. So that's an interesting one to navigate as well.
It is, and as you're saying that, we talked about last week, sort of the comment, "Oh, I'm just joking." And look, I'll give you a personal anecdote of once sitting in a meeting and having a client who had dictated what our fee would be for that project, and in fact increased it without asking us to increase it. He said, "I'm going to up your scope and your contract." And I went, "Okay." And then sitting in a meeting where there was a comment about budgets and where income was coming, and he said, "Well, we'll need that money to pay Georgie's fee." And I was like, "Oh." And then the meeting went on, and then he made another comment. "Well, we'll need a big income because Georgie's so expensive," which I can tell you now, I think we made about $2 an hour on that project. We were not expensive. And so I remember afterwards, and actually spoke to someone else in the meeting who said, "That was weird, wasn't it?" I said, "Yeah, I don't know where that came from, particularly because he had set the rate, not me."
Right.
And I remember talking to my business coach, and she gave me some really good feedback on how to approach it. And so I had a chat with him and just said, "I've noticed a couple of comments. Is there anything that you want to discuss or bring up?" And he said, "Oh, no, I'm just joking. No, I'm a funny guy. I'm just joking." Like, okay. And then about 3 weeks later, we were doing a walkthrough at the venue with a big group of people, and he made a joke to someone, and then he elbowed me, like ribbing, and went, "See, I'm a funny guy. That's what I do. I make jokes." I was like, "Oh, I think the joke's on you, mate." But it was just kind of, the fact that he did the whole, "Oh, no, I'm just joking." But then 3 weeks later still referenced it as if to say, "See, I'm serious. I really was joking." It was just bizarre. It was such a cowardly way to respond to the fact that something was rolling him up. And this is about 14 years ago. So it's all, and I don't know where this person, actually, I've never come across them again in the industry. I think they've sort of stepped out of it. But it was just a kind of, yeah.
Well, look, that ties in with the many questions that I have for you and the concept of, do we have to be funny all the time? But before we dive into today's topic, I want to revisit a couple of moments from the previous episode. It's going to take literally 30 seconds. So the first moment that I would like to revisit is, I think I mispronounced the word retaliation. So that's, that's one that I would like to mention. And the second one is that I would like to apologize to Tina Arena for not mentioning her during the last episode.
We stand still at $5 in the Tina Arena mention jar. You call yourself a fan. I don't know.
The amount of Tina Arena I've listened to in the past week, because we spoke about her in the country episode, because she's written so many songs that she recorded herself and then had country artists cover. So I have that little compilation on Deezer, which is my platform of choice for music sound compilations.
We'd like to know, dear listeners, if you're Team Deezer with Vicken or Team Spotify with Georgie.
That's right. So I was listening to that compilation of all the songs that Tina Arena has written literally for other artists. And so I remembered that I failed to mention, because that was 2 episodes ago. That was the episode about Beyonce. So I did not mention her in our 3rd episode. But now's the opportunity to say that we are also launching companion playlists for our episodes. And the Drop It Like It's Pop crossover, the new Renaissance episode, now has a companion playlist on Deezer that I put together. So Deezer, for those who don't know, is a streaming platform that was created in France. So it's a France-based platform, and it's always the one that I've listened to. And so I'm a Deezer stan, and I would like to say that. And the soundtrack's available now to our episode.
Did you say a Deezer stan?
Yeah.
What's that? Because I in the notes for the last episode, you wrote Georgie a Seinfeld fan, Vicken a Forever Friends stan, and I thought, he's made a typo, and I corrected it to fan. I'll have to go
No,
back
I
and
did not
correct
make a
that.
typo. A stan is a very dedicated fan from, you remember the song Stan by Eminem, don't
Of
you?
course.
Well,
And
that's
Dido.
Stan.
No, that wasn't. Was Dido in that one? Some of that one.
So
As
that was Dido. So
Shoot.
that was Dido's Thank You, the snippet
Yes.
from Thank You, the Dido
Yes.
song that was sampled and became the chorus to the song Stand by Eminem.
Yes.
But at the Grammy Awards the following year, Dido didn't perform with Eminem. He performed with Elton John performed.
That's right.
with Eminem.
And yes, Elton John talks quite a bit about that because people questioned Elton John playing with Eminem because some of his lyrics had been quite homophobic. And so Elton John actually talks about that. And then Eminem popped up in an Ed Sheeran concert in his hometown because Ed Sheeran, I believe, had a stutter maybe when he was younger, and he used to listen to a lot of Eminem and really looked up to him. And there's some great clips of Ed Sheeran starting to sing the song Lose. I think he is singing Lose Yourself. I'll clarify that next week if I'm wrong. And then Eminem pops up on the stage and everyone goes crazy.
Does that Eminem performance with Elton John, does that say damage control to you, the PR specialist?
No, it doesn't actually. Look, I am a big Eminem fan, and I love watching clips of other artists like 50 Cent and Snoop Dogg talk about Eminem. And Eminem's a really interesting one. I know we are going to get onto comedy. He's an interesting one in a genre around culture. And there's certainly clips, and I think it's Snoop Dogg talking about rap is, and this is in the words of, I'm sure it's Snoop Dogg, saying rap is black music. And a lot of the community can't cope or don't like the fact that the best rapper is a white guy. So that I find that really interesting. But it kind of brings up, and I don't know enough about Eminem's early music, but can you separate the sort of the artist from the man kind of thing?
Well, we had that conversation.
That might be a conversation for a future one.
And a good one at that, because we spoke about Beyonce and Beyonce getting the seal of approval from Dolly Parton and Willie Nelson for her, what people have called her country album, Cowboy Carter. Likewise, Eminem's producer was Dr. Dre. I mean, one of the greatest rappers, producers, success stories in rap ever.
Correct.
I still get chills whenever I think of the Super Bowl performance that Dr. Dre did. So,
did Dr. Dre get his star recently on? There was a ceremony recently, whether it was his star or his handprints in Hollywood, and Eminem
was there.
He was, yeah. And there's really cute clips of Eminem and 50 Cent on red carpets. Like that's a whole interesting world.
And then that ties in with probably another episode that we'll have about damage control in public relations and in pop culture, because that would be a very interesting. I'll have heaps of question about that for you as well.
Well, stay tuned to my pop culture moment of the week for that.
Oh, very exciting. Okay. Yes. Well, in order to get to that pop culture moment of the week, we have to get through the episode first.
We do.
So to this, as I said, following our previous episode in which we discussed comedy, the injunction to laugh as a spectator, we wanted to go a step further and dive deeper into the mechanisms of the humor of the stand-up comedian. So from comedy club stages to television specials, from talk shows to award ceremonies, stand-up comedy is a language all its own, which often takes center stage and has to navigate. We were talking about navigating, fine lines, navigating a fine line between lighthearted banter and triggering uncomfortable interactions. So in the past few years, many comics have been put on the spot for going too far under the guise of well-meaning humor. And now it feels like the right time to analyze the good, the bad, and the ugly of stand-up comedy. So, I mean, let's maybe start with the pressure of being funny.
Exactly, and this was highlighted recently when I saw an article about Ben Stiller is a guest on David Duchovny's upcoming podcast, Fail Better, which I tried to listen to, but Spotify tells me it doesn't come out until the next few days, so this is sort of a preview. But he was talking about how surprised and sort of shocked he was by how badly Zoolander 2 was received. And I'll just read his quote. So he was surprised by the critical and commercial scorn with the movie received. And he said, I thought everybody wanted this. And then it's like, wow, I must have really fucked this up. Everybody didn't go to it, and it's gotten these horrible reviews. And and apologies for my language, but he went on to say, it really freaked me out because I was like, I didn't know, was that bad? What scared me the most on that one was I'm losing what I think is funny, and you start questioning yourself. On Zoolander 2, it was definitely blindsiding to me, and it definitely affected me for a long time. And I thought, I was thinking of this in the context of any job. I mean, if a painter paints a house badly, or, a lawyer doesn't have a good case, if a financial person makes a bad decision, you feel it. I mean, this is their job. So if they're not funny, to them, they're not doing their job well. So I think we can be really critical of comedians, but it is pretty brave, I think, to put yourself out there on that stage.
As you were telling that anecdote referring to Ben Stiller, an instance of me being on stage having to be funny came back. So before I ask you the question, we're going back to 2000, and I was a student at the University of Technology, Sydney, UTS, and international students, they used to have an international student services department that was huge, and really, the welcome that international students used to get, I think, was out of this world. So we had these, orientation week, obviously. And for international students, I remember one instance where we were all together in an amphitheater, and former international students would take the stage and kind of welcome, not former, but people who had started maybe a semester or 2 semesters before, or a couple of years, would welcome the students. And it was like a full-on performance. You had to engage the audience, people who had left their home countries to come to, we're talking 2000. International students in Australia back in the day was not what it is today.
No, exactly.
Here now in Sydney, you can't walk 50 meters without hearing someone speaking French. So I have very vivid memories of the people that took to the stage and how funny they were. And then 6 months in, because I built this relationship with some of the people from the International Student Services Department, I was asked to be one of those people. And my only goal was to be as funny as the people who had taken to the stage, when I was in the audience. And I remember, and I did get some laughs, and they were, it's a buzz. Like it's a rush of adrenaline when you do get the laughs, and because you're hitting the spot.
Yes.
And I even remember, because it was such a moment for me, that because I'd been on stage for very serious things, but had never been on stage in a comedian capacity. And this was probably my first time. And I remember feeling the buzz of that and having felt the pressure before. And what a relief to have kind of hit the nail on the head and gotten the laughs.
Yeah, it's I was listening to Jerry Seinfeld's a bit of his audio, well, a bit of his book, but in the audio form, and it's called "Is This Anything?" And he talks about how comedians test jokes against each other. Is this anything? And, they come off and they'll say, did you get anything for that joke? And he says, you're slightly amazed when you do get a laugh. Like he said, and I just thought this was interesting. I printed out, I did a bit of homework and printed out. I've killed some trees here with my clippings, but he said, I still don't know exactly for sure where jokes come from. But he talks about, he actually says, I think it's from some emotional cocktail of boredom, aggression, intense visual acuity. I'll have to fact check that word. A kind of silly putty of the mind that enables you to reform what you see into what you want it to be. But he says it's just like sort of hurtling through space. You don't know if something's going to land. And
Yes.
I mean, you talk about, you hear comedians talk about testing their jokes, with those smaller audiences. And it is really tough because you don't know if that's going to work until you get in front of a live audience. And I was listening to, I think it's Jimmy Fallon talking about one of his favourite skits from SNL. And he said, we didn't even know if it would air. So Saturday Night Live. And it's where they're playing in a band. He said it wasn't that funny. We didn't even know if we'd air it. And then when they went live, and Will Ferrell was in it, so of course he was hilarious, and he upped it, and it was just the funniest scene you've ever seen. But until going live, they still didn't know if that would be funny.
And they had the same situation with one from last year, the previous season, with a new character that was introduced in the Pedro Pascal episode. That was Lisa from Temecula. And Ego Wodem, who portrayed Lisa from Temecula, came out and explained how because it got so much buzz here in the United States. There are very few television programs that I watch here. Saturday Night Live is one of them. And
I'd like to talk about Saturday Night Live.
We may reference a few more, people from Saturday Night Live today, but yes, absolutely. I think you raised something very interesting here and I can draw a parallel with journalism, particularly radio journalism and even podcasting, the importance of writing. Because I started my career in journalism as a volunteer in community radio stations. So I don't want to make it a bigger thing than it actually is, because I was just volunteering in a community radio station. And I saw very early on how everyone who worked at the radio station, specifically because it was a bilingual radio station, I saw firsthand the importance of writing. And I remember one of the shows where the two hosts were interacting in two different languages. So questions, so that obviously, people know by now. So it was French and Armenian.
Yes.
And they would actually interact because they understood well enough the other language to kind of have that conversation. But there was so much writing going on because improvising is a skill, but you cannot wing an entire show. You cannot wing an entire stand-up comedy show or just a radio show or even a podcast.
Exactly. Yes. And I find it really interesting around which comedians have sort of those transferable skills of being a stand-up, can be a funny host, can be a presenter, because, we've all heard about the comedians that aren't, if you walked up to them on the street and said, tell me a joke, they can't. They're not that kind of comedian.
Right.
And I think, Steve Martin's one of those, he's a quieter sort of person. And there's people that come through those improv channels. And if you think of the Groundlings in California, Second City in Chicago and Toronto, it's kind of a who's who it's sort of like a who's who event who ends up in SNL. But just going back to the writing, and I snapshot this, so I'll read it verbatim, because I thought this was really interesting. This was out of Jerry Seinfeld's book too. He said, in the 60s and 70s, they would say on TV about certain comedians, and he writes his own stuff because it wasn't a thing. And he said comedians like Bob Hope and Jack Benny would actually joke about their writers as part of their act. And he goes on to say stand-up comedy in the 60s made the same turn that music did with singer-songwriters becoming the way it was done. So, rather than having your songwriter, someone else sing the song, someone writing your jokes. I mean, obviously we can talk about writers' rooms, but it was interesting, isn't it, that it was such a sort of a novelty that a comedian would actually write his own things. And he said, I've never done anything else. But he says there is something exciting, I think, about being in the same room with the person who originally thought all the ideas you're hearing. So I thought that was really interesting around that writing concept. Yeah.
And you're absolutely right about going to someone and asking them to be funny on the spot. You would never ask an athlete because it's a muscle that you have to flex, and kind of the environment has to be right. And I'm going to mention the athletes because you and I have both worked in the sports world. I mean, you have to warm up. It's something that, it doesn't always come naturally. And I feel like it's the same thing when you have a singer who's on a show, on a talk show or something. Some talk show hosts, I have specific examples thinking about, some shows that I used to watch in France, but people are actually going to ask a singer to just, belt out a song while, during a talk show, and that's not what they're there for. And I actually respect very much the singers or, the performers who actually say, I'm sorry, this is a muscle that I have to warm up. I can't belt something out for you on the spot. And we have a very popular one that's an example in France who does imitations, and he's very skilled and, has a beautiful voice. And I remember an example of him turning down the host of the show saying, no, I'm sorry, I can't. This is something that I have to warm up before I can actually use it. So absolutely 100%. I think
I was just going to add to that, sorry to interrupt you. But you do see comedians who can think on the spot. So I know in the last episode I talked about Would I Lie to You? I also love 8 out of 10 Cats Does Countdown. And, probably other shows like Nevermind, and I'm talking UK shows now, like Nevermind the Buzzcocks. Those, and even QI, that's where you really see certain comedians at work. I mean, I don't think of David Mitchell as kind of stand-up, but Lee Mack I do. But the way they can bounce off each other and are really quick-witted. And obviously those shows have an element of scripting to them, and certainly on 8 out of 10 Cats Does Countdown, you can see, how Jimmy Carr, the host, sets them up for jokes. But there's still a lot of improv. There's a lot of riffing against each other. So you kind of, and that's what I guess I was talking about, those skills that can go into different formats. I think there's some comedians that can just think, and Lee Mack, I think, thinks incredibly fast on his feet, even when you watch him on Celebrity Great British Bake Off.
But I think
it's interesting, there's those comedians that are around that more structured writing element and the ones that can bounce off each other.
Well, I think that even for those that can, they actually have a bag of tricks, and they actually have a bag of jokes that they can, pull out jokes from, considering the different situations that they're going to find themselves in. Because it becomes like a second language that you know how to speak, and that you know how to kind of reach out for the right material in your head that you've stored probably somewhere in your mind. And we'll probably talk about this down the line, but last episode we spoke about observational humor as opposed to character-based humor, kind of conveying the same messages after all, but in a very different manner. And we spoke about how cultural those are. Now I feel, and I don't know how much that was mentioned. I don't remember how much that was mentioned in the previous episode. But what you're referencing here is what I would call conversational humor, because we have so many stand-up comedians now who actually stand on stage, and then you see all of those videos on TikTok and Insta stories, comedians who actually stand on stage, and their job is kind of to have a conversation with the first row. And there's one that's really picked up here in the United States. I don't know how famous she is internationally. Her name is Jessica Kirson, and I see a lot of her. I mean, she's all over my algorithm for some reason. And literally, she just stands there and has conversation. I don't know how much of her show those elements make up, but she literally just stands there and has long conversations with the first row. Some people sit in the first row on purpose to get to have that
Yes.
interaction. And I think you think, oh my God, the repartee, that is amazing. But I think there's also a bag of tricks there somewhere.
Yes. Well, here you go. I'll tell you two stories from some comedy festival experiences I've had. So we went, a group of friends and I, and my partner went and saw a comedian a few years ago. She was just kind of hitting the big time. So she was in a small venue, like it was a tiny venue at a pub, and she was hilarious. Like, I mean, I can remember at one point I was laughing so much no sound was coming out. My partner was kind of hitting his leg, you know, sort of bouncing back and forth in fits of laughter, and my friend sitting next to him was crying with laughter. And there was a heckler. We didn't hear the heckler, but we heard her response to the heckler, and it was hilarious. And we were like, oh my God, how do you think up that kind of response to a heckler? Anyway, fast forward the next year, she's playing again. Now, we didn't read the detail that it was the same show because, you know, comedians have shows. And in a much bigger theatre, I think a much bigger theatre. She starts off, and it was just my partner and I, and we looked at each other, and it was word for word the same comedy. It was the same show, and it was word for word.
And the same heckler?
So, same thing happened. She gets heckled. Once again, we couldn't hear the heckling, and the response was exactly the same. So it was a fake heckler all along. And we were like, oh my God, like this is... So I get that they write their shows, you know, some comedians write their shows word for word and they just take that show around. But that was kind of, it was the fake heckling that really got us because it was word for word the same. But contrast that to another comedian that I saw with a friend at the festival years ago, and we saw him and we had such a crush on him that we went like 3 nights later and his show was completely different. Like he was just bouncing off the audience. I reckon there was, out of, say, a 50-minute set, 5 minutes was the same. And the rest, he just went off on tangents based on what was happening in the audience. So even the way, you know, stand-up happens is, and they were both acts are pure stand-up acts, but so different in the way they delivered them.
Well, good on the ones that feed off of what they get from the audience, because, I mean, it is a skill. I liken it to, you know, and you've certainly done that as well, but I do more formal teaching than, you know, training or giving conferences. And if you feed off of the group of people that you're with, you can really go off, you know, the main script of what you're going to say and kind of feed off of that. And then you kind of have to make your way back.
Yes.
But you know who's really good with hecklers is Tina Arena.
Yeah.
I've seen her do that.
When does Tina Arena get hecklers?
Well, I think there was a show that she did.
Anyway, that's a dollar. I'm noting that down.
Yes, please. That was broadcast around the world, and some of the people in the audience were a bit too enthusiastic and were kind of requesting songs and things like that.
Did they enjoy a few pre-show drinks maybe in the lobby bar?
I think they may well have, and Tina Arena mentioned that as well. So,
I mean, I find hecklers very who goes to a show to heckle? I don't understand heckling. I certainly know some comedians love a heckler and make a real game out of it. And when I worked at the comedy festival a few years ago, each comedian had a different approach to heckling. So depending on the show and I was a front of house manager, depending on the show you're working on, you know, there were different sort of responses to, some loved to handle them, some maybe not. But we had a situation here in Melbourne a couple of weeks ago now that's got quite big in the news, where the heckler was a baby in an Arj Barker show. So Arj Barker, originally American, but resides in Melbourne most of the time. And there was a young baby in the show, and Arj Barker asked the mum to leave the show with the baby because he felt the baby was interrupting and ruining the experience. It was a crying baby, ruining the experience for everyone who'd come see his show. Anyway, it's garnered huge press over here. So there you go. You just never know who your heckler might be.
I mean, thinking on your feet is one thing. Being able to deal with a situation like that is another. So,
Yes.
sometimes you're in the right frame of mind to even take in something as extreme as that. I'm going to say, I mean, that also bears the question of how much can you take without saying something? If we think about stand-up comedy and awards shows, for example, and all those introductory speeches where, the talk show host who's become an awards show host who used to be a stand-up comedian stands on stage and actually calls out some of the people in the audience and sometimes puts them on the spot and puts them in very uncomfortable positions. So when you said heckler, my mind went to the most extreme case of heckling we've potentially ever seen, which was Will Smith at the Oscars with, Chris Rock.
Absolutely.
And then I was thinking about Robert Downey Jr. this year at the Oscars with Jimmy Kimmel. That's stand-up comedy aimed at someone we all know, and they actually have tools to actually make that person feel uncomfortable, and everyone around that person has the context, and that makes people all the more comfortable. So, funny at what expense is my question.
Oh, absolutely. And I think of the interview with Lindsay Lohan on David Letterman, where he's saying to her, when are you going to rehab? And I think she's planning to go, and he's saying, when are you checking in? Will you go? And you've got this young girl who's obviously got is going through some challenges, and you've got this man in a power position, not only as an older man, and I say power position as in society assumes, where the context of society gives him that power, but at a host, as the host, that's very hard for her to call out as a young person. Because you've got the pressure, you've got a live audience, you've got a show that's been recorded. If you call it out, you're seen as ruining that. You might be seen as, oh, she's difficult, don't ever get her on again.
And she said something very important during that interview. She said this was not part of the rehearsal interview that we did. Right.
And we've seen it on Ellen with people pushing back on Ellen. I mean, I think Ellen DeGeneres is the biggest culprit we all know for.
I think to Letterman, some people have stood up to Letterman. Madonna has stood up to Letterman. Cher has stood up to Letterman over the years.
Look,
and
I don't get Letterman. I've never understood. I mean, I hear people like Jimmy Kimmel and Dax Shepard talk about how amazing David Letterman is, and how clever. And I've actually never got I don't understand David Letterman.
Look, David Letterman's show was one of the only American talk shows that was on in France on cable when I was growing up. So in the 1990s, when I was a teenager, young adult. And I just used to watch the show because there weren't that many programs in English on French television back in the day. And I used to watch it. You know what? I don't know if I understood it. It was interesting because I was studying American civilization at university. So I took it kind of like as an experiment. But I vividly remember the moments you remember really are when people stand up to some of those people.
Yes.
And to go back to Will Smith standing up to Chris Rock, I think that there's been instances in France, because in France, the Me Too movement started a few years ago when it started internationally, but it's never really stopped. So at the moment in France, it's instance after instance after instance of different groups of women standing up and saying, I mean, we've had, doctors in hospitals, we've had more actresses come out to say their truths, and there's been so many controversies. And one of our comedians who was hosting the César Awards, which are the equivalent to the Oscars, got heckled by one of the actresses because he made a joke about that whole Me Too movement and what was going on. And one of the actresses who'd been really vocal about this stood up to him literally on stage. Likewise, being on a stage does not give you license, I guess, to say whatever you want. And if our minister for the arts and culture in France actually grabbed the microphone a couple of years ago at the ceremony to tell her truth about some of the things that had been thrown at her. And it wasn't in a comedy skit. It was in an actual speech.
Yes. But so coming back to that, yes, it doesn't give you, sorry, I'm stuttering over my words. It doesn't give you license to say anything, but I actually think in the case of something like an awards show, it actually comes back to the producers and the directors and the event managers, because if the Golden Globes get Ricky Gervais, they are getting him because of his style, because they know he'll be controversial, because they know he'll pick on people, he'll be hilarious, he'll go rogue, he'll come on with a glass of beer. So it's a fine line, isn't it, between getting someone for their style of humour, but then saying, oh, no, you shouldn't have said that. It's like, but you got them because of that style of humour. And I saw something recently on social media from a comedian who was relaying a story about how they had been briefed on an event, and we certainly brief all our performers on events. We brief them on the style of the audience, on what, the tone of the event. Is it casual? Is it quite corporate? Is it under 18s? Is it over 18s? Is it a family event? So we give them guidelines to help them prepare, because you don't want someone to come on and do, a really sort of blue Jimmy Carr set at a family event, that it's not the right thing. And this comedian had been briefed, obviously, for an event they were working on. I didn't know the comedian, it just popped up in my feed. But they said that they'd been asked not to use any explicit language, which to me actually is just a standard thing we would put in a speaker briefing. Right. And they really arced up on social media saying, but that's my whole act, so don't get me on because I'm this style of person and then try and censor me. And then that was really interesting for me as an event manager and someone who briefs performers to read that and go and actually sort of have to challenge the way we brief. I mean, with my staff, we came back to the way we're doing it is the way we want to continue doing it. We're okay. But we did kind of go through that process of asking ourselves that. So you do know, I think there has to be some responsibility with the people running those awards shows and why they get certain comedians on. And I do think there's also a context of, like, I think of Amy Poehler and Tina Fey when they host something like the Golden Globes. They pick on people in the audience. But is it allowed because of the style that they do it in, or are they picking on people but it's actually not in a mean sense, or it's not in a really personal sense, like a Robert Downey Jr. kind of joke, or the way Lindsay Lohan was talked to or spoken to by David Letterman. So, I think, you can't just go, completely a free-for-all on the stage, but those hosts have been brought on for a reason.
But imagine, and that raises a very good question, and that's something that we deal with a lot in our lines of work, is there's no such thing as it goes without saying that. You have to verbalize everything, because what if that item had not been in the brief for the person, and the person had gone on up on the stage and started, delivering what they usually deliver.
But you also do your research. So, I work with organisations on getting ambassadors on board, and we've certainly earmarked some ambassadors, but then have looked further into them and they've actually been against a cause or maybe even a sponsor. So you sort of do your due diligence and go, maybe, they're an amazing person, but they're actually just not the right fit because some of their views are in contrast to what, who this charity is sort of associated with. So, you do your due diligence. And I certainly know of, I can remember working on an event It was a gazillion years ago, but it was a dairy. It was the dairy industry. Was a section of the dairy industry, and they were getting a naturopath on to talk about something. But and you know they did brief the naturopath to say, don't come on here and be anti milk products because you're talking to an industry that's their whole livelihood. So, you know, you don't want to censor people. You do need to brief your performers and give that context.
Yes.
In the case of Will Smith and Chris Rock, I mean, I actually find the reaction more fascinating than not the reaction of Will Smith. I think I actually think Will Smith just showed himself up for who he is. I've never bought the Will Smith facade, nice guy kind of persona. So I actually think he just showed who he is. But I found the reaction of the audience quite startling, that I think in the way they reacted, they condoned that violence. Well,
right.
I don't think they definitely did condone that violence. And then when he won, their reaction, and I think if that had been in another context, everyone would have rushed up and pulled him off the stage.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if this was at a pub and someone was throwing a punch, or if this was on a sporting field, teammates might have run up and kept, you know, got in the melee. But so I actually think that was more astounding and telling, was actually the way they responded.
I think you have to differentiate the heckling that happened first and then the slap that happened afterwards. And as you were talking about this, I was thinking about the book, The Slap by Christos Tsiolkas, which is probably one of the finest Australian novels that's come out in the past, few years, in the past decade. And I was thinking about, imagine if you actually had a book of, different chapters, and one chapter is from Chris Rock's point of view, and another one is because that's the premise of the book.
Yes.
Let's set the premise of the book. It's a family barbecue. A child is acting up, and one of the parents at the barbecue, who is not the parent of the child, slaps the kids. One of the kids, when he sees that he poses a potential danger to their own children. So, fascinating book, fascinating TV series. A huge fan of Christos Tsiolkas' work. But what I find more fascinating is, imagine if you had all those chapters. So one from Jada's point of view, and one from Will's point of view, and one from Chris's point of view, one from Lupita Nyong'o's point of view, because it became a meme, her face as she was watching that situation. I think it would be absolutely fascinating. I am not going to give my opinion on Will Smith because I prefer to leave it at that potential kind of imagine
just leave me giving my very honest opinion of Will Smith.
No, I mean, you know what? If we had an episode, we're going to have an episode about feuds, and we'll kind of, I think that would actually fit in.
My feud with Will Smith.
I'm saving some of my opinions for later. Let's save it for the next episode, shall we?
Yes, let's do that.
So, no, you raise a very interesting.
Did I say too much?
No, absolutely not. No, we said we were going to say some things, so absolutely. I enjoy this. Can I just say, though?
Yes.
You were talking about that, and I kind of want to take it back to this year and the Golden Globes and the Grammy Awards. Joe Coy at the Golden Globes making a joke about Taylor Swift, cut to Taylor pouring a drink, not amused. And then at the Grammy Awards, Trevor Noah doing a joke that didn't feel so different to me than the one that Joe Coy had done, and then cut to Taylor, laughing out loud at the joke that Trevor just did. So that raises two questions for me. Maybe not just the one question is, are there people that we are not allowed to laugh about anymore if they themselves don't laugh? I don't think the joke was offensive in any way, but it kind of raised the question of different strokes for different folks.
Yes. Yeah, no, absolutely. And look, I mean, that Joe Coy, isn't that terrible? Every time I think of Joe Coy in my head, I say Joe Rogan, which would be a big...
I find Joe Coy, it doesn't, it doesn't roll out to, yeah.
Do we need Joe Rogan hosting the
I don't know.
That'd be a whole nother episode.
I mean, who am I to talk with my name? Can I just say that?
Well, what about mine? No one can ever get my name right. I've had everything. I've had stray cats, spacious, stay there. And these are in work correspondence, everything. But I think the Joe Coy thing, I mean, that whole night, do you know what? It's weird, isn't it? Like I think back and you go, oh, he's not saving lives. He hosted, let's just break it down. He hosted an awards show for the entertainment industry. But I remember the response to Joe Coy.
Joe Coy.
Joe Coy was almost visceral, you know. I mean, everyone was really, and I think that, and I mean, I was one of those people. I can remember leaving you a voice memo, walking to work on WhatsApp, going, rah, rah, rah. Why did we get? Sorry, I've got bells. That's just the GPO, the old post office in
Got it.
in Melbourne. Just I'm not in church, in case you're wondering. And if you couldn't hear those, just ignore what I just said there. Why did we get so rolled up about his whole hosting and talking about the pressure to be funny? And I'll come back to the sort of double standards almost of when a joke gets received. When he was, you know, bombing on stage, actually, he made a comment, didn't he? Like, I only got this gig 2 weeks ago. And it was kind of that to me, that's kind of the sort of the last thing you do as a comedian is just fire back at the audience and go, well, I only just got the job.
In any job, if you take the job, you deliver.
Correct, exactly. You could have said, sorry, I can't prepare something in 2 weeks. So he seemed to be on the back foot from the start. Now, we don't know what's going on in the background with the writing room, with what jokes have been allowed and not allowed, and we certainly know the Golden Globes have had their own controversies over the years, so potentially they're more heightened to the hosting. It was the Golden Globes he hosted, wasn't it? So we don't know what's going on, but I just felt he built no rapport with the audience. He kind of came out and just attacked the audience. I felt Trevor Noah seemed to be part of the audience at the Grammys, maybe. Whereas Joe Coy was just sort of, you know, yelling at the audience. Mm-hmm. Trevor Noah had a very different style. So maybe that style and the rapport he's built allowed for the joke. I know it doesn't make it right that the same joke. And look, I did think, you know, and I don't want to upset the Swifties because I'm one of those. I don't know. I mean, the shot of Taylor taking the drink and her look, I think that was blown out of proportion too, was her response, how her response was received. I mean, we've all kind of taken a drink and looked at a friend and went, you know, that's what I felt she was doing. And, of course, it gets broadcast and then, you know, it goes global.
I think, and can I just say that potential aspect of having to be careful every single second has really taken over everyone's lives with Zoom meetings happening, you know, with these big meetings happening where you end up finding yourself observing people's reactions on the screen. And you have to, I mean, you know, there's something to be said about poker face because I've been in so many meetings going into them, you know, you think of your own reaction and you think about the reaction of the other people and you look at you kind of observe. Obviously, if it were a meeting in a room, it would be maybe a little similar, but not as, you know, it's not the same as having everyone's faces on your screen and kind of being able to see everything, you know, so.
Oh, I mean, we talked about the Animal Kingdom YouTube reunion in a previous episode. And if you want to look at reactions, go on to that because Ben Mendelsohn can't get into the Zoom call. Ben Mendelsohn, an amazing actor and a crush of mine. He can't get into which was half the reason I was watching the YouTube. He can't get into the Zoom. So, you know, the whole sort of live Zoom, and it was live at the time, is, you know, and he's texting them, I can't get in. Then he finally gets in and I don't know where he is, but he's having a grand old time somewhere. And we've kind of had this very serious conversation about the 10-year anniversary of the film. And then Ben Mendelsohn gets in halfway through and kind of just wreaks havoc. And you watch the reaction of, Jackie Weaver, the director, Joel Edgerton, on the screen, and it's fascinating. So you're right, which you probably wouldn't do as much maybe on a panel, because you might just be looking at one of the panelists rather than all of the panelists.
That's right. So I guess for stand-up comedians becoming awards show hosts, you take it with it comes with a risk. I mean, think about James Franco and Anne Hathaway hosting the Oscars a few years ago.
Yes.
The backlash that they faced after that, it's a tough gig. I'll give you that. It's a tough gig.
It's a very tough gig. And like, I was looking over, sort of who has hosted in the past, the Grammys and then the Grammys and then the Oscars. And, the Grammys have had people like, oh my God, complete blank. Kenny Rogers host it.
Yes.
So they've actually had the musical element. The Oscars have had Johnny Carson. They do have a theme of comedians.
Mm-hmm.
And then we've had, eras where there were a few.
Whoopi hosted the Oscars.
Then we've had people like Hugh Jackman, and so the musical element. I do think I can see why Billy Crystal kept coming back because he was kind of a proven formula, and it worked.
I think Hugh Jackman, I loved Hugh Jackman. The year he hosted the Oscars, I think it was incredible.
Yes, because you do. I think a host is like, it's an MC, and you're not there to make it about you, but you do have to string it together. So it is a really hard thing, and there is expectations of you. I think Neil Patrick Harris is an amazing host, and if there's a Tony's, I can't remember which year he's hosted the Tonys a few years. He does the most amazing opening act. Like, we watch it at home on YouTube, and we can never work out how he's got breath left at the end because of the singing, the dancing, the acrobats he does. So it's a really fine line, but I think it goes wrong when they try and make it about themselves and try and be too funny.
That's right.
So just let the show speak for itself and just be there to support it and enhance it. But as soon as you try and be really funny, and I find this on talk shows as well, when those guests try and be funny, it actually has the opposite effect.
It's a bit cringe because we've all seen some of those guests trying to be funny, and you can actually see that, the joke is not landing, and it's actually, which takes us back to, you only laugh when it's funny. There is an injunction to laugh in some contexts, but sometimes, you can try to set up the audience for a laugh, but sometimes it just doesn't work.
Absolutely, and it can depend on what's happened before. Where the warm-up. I mean, we haven't even spoken about warm-up people that get the audience.
But you spoke about it last week when you mentioned that show that you had literally been interviewed to be a part of the audience.
That's right. I mean, I remember going to be in the audience of a morning talk show here, and I thought the warm-up guy was hilarious. And I said to my friend, actually the same friend that we stalked the other comedian, I said, we've got to go and see this guy at the comedy festival. He's hilarious. I think there was 12 of us in the audience. I think we were the only two that didn't know him. And it just, oh God, talk about watch someone sort of die on the stage. But do you know what? We kind of then were over laughing because it was like we were egging this guy on.
Right, yeah.
And so, but in the context of being a warm-up guy, he was hilarious. And we do know that, some comedians come from being warm-up people. But it made me think about, that injunction to laugh and that over rewarding someone almost. I remember being in Vietnam with my friend, and we were on a day trip out of Saigon, I think, and Ho Chi Minh City. And the tour guide had a stutter. And the more nervous he got, we were sitting up the front of the bus, the more nervous he got, the worse his stuttering got. And everyone else on the bus were talking and laughing. And we felt so much for this guy that my friend and I were completely overcompensating. Like, we were nodding and smiling at him, trying to egg him on and sort of support him and go, it's okay, we're here, because we just felt for him in that moment. So, anyway, I mean, he wasn't trying to be funny. He was just trying to
do his job, I guess. But I mean, the concept of job is interesting, because if you think about comedy actors who are so incredibly gifted, when they end up going on stage, when they win an award, the pressure of being funny is also there for them. And I remember when Deborah Messing won the Emmy for comedy actress for Will and Grace, she just went up the stage and kind of set the record straight, saying, I'm the least funny person there is. Like, I just won. And same for Edie Falco, when she won for Nurse Jackie, the comedy Emmy, she went up the stage and went, I'm not funny. So that was very, they were two very kind of powerful moments of comedy actresses owning the fact that, yes, they were maybe good in comedy as actresses, but in life, and then there's also those, I mean, if you think about Jennifer Coolidge, who's just the presence of Jennifer Coolidge will get the laughs.
Absolutely.
And then there's Julia Louis-Dreyfus, who we've spoken about, who just writes these incredible out of this world speeches whenever she's honored.
Absolutely. And her 2013 Emmys acceptance speech for Veep, which is an amazing show if anyone hasn't watched it. And she gets up, and in the show, she's the vice president, and she has this sort of the bag man, Gary, who carries around, they call this, what do they call it? The Leviathan, I think, that, stores everything, her lip gloss, and so she's so she gets up to accept the award for those who haven't seen it. And then he gets up with her and stands behind her with her handbag. And then they cross to Anna Klumsky, who plays her sort of chief of staff, who in the show's always on her BlackBerry, and she's in the audience on her BlackBerry. And I just thought the effort they'd gone to, and it was superb, because they knew the elements we love for Veep, and it just gives a bit of it gives a bit of light relief in an awards show that is just, it's about entertainment.
And to be honest, Julia Louis-Dreyfus won 7 years in a row for that show. So if you think about it, she actually, well, not 7 years in a row. She won 7 times. I don't know if they were in a row, but she won for all seasons but one. And every single time, I also remember her speech. She gave a funny speech just only days after her dad had passed away. Yes. So that was also a big one. And she was so funny during the entire speech, and then kind of just broke at the end. Yeah. And it kind of shows you how much of a skill this is to still be funny when there are other things happening in the background. And we kind of, I mentioned Quiet on Set, the documentary about Nickelodeon and all these kids being funny on film when horrendous, horrible, awful things were happening behind the scenes.
Actually, absolutely. And it's someone that we work with, Geraldine Quinn, who has just had, is a comedian, a rock performer, a cabaret artist. She's host of an event that we work on here. We went to her show this year, which was called The Passion of St. Nicholas, which was actually about the death of her brother a few years ago from brain cancer. So, I mean, to channel your grief through a show, it is hands down one of the most amazing. I mean, I can't even call it comedy because it's so much more than that, but it is hands down one of the most amazing shows I've ever seen. Like, this, and there was an amazing article in The Age saying, why has she not taken on Broadway? Because she is so amazing. But
what is The Age?
What's her age?
I know what The Age is. But
sorry, yes.
Our lovely listeners may not know.
One of our mastheads, one of our newspapers in Melbourne. But so she's about to launch and perform at the Melbourne International Comedy Festival a show about the death of her brother, and her dad dies about a week out from the show. Mm-hmm. I don't know how she got up and did that show every day. She recently posted an Instagram story or reel that she had recorded the day her dad died, but she didn't post this reel until after. And she actually referenced some kickback that Tim Minchin got. So Tim Minchin, an Australian singer-songwriter, writer of Matilda, the stage show. I think he also did Groundhog Day, the musical, if I'm not mistaken. So an amazing guy. And he had performed a show, and then during the show, he said, "My mum," I think he said he said something like, "My mum died 2 days ago." And an ex-politician, Amanda Vanstone, actually commented or wrote an editorial saying, that's devastating, but you don't need to bring that into your show. And so Geraldine references this in her story. And for anyone, I recommend going on and watching it, because she said, this is our work. Like, I can't cancel my shows. I have to get up and be funny. Like, she had to go on and do 2 shows, either the day after her father passed away or the day her father passed away. She said, I can't stop. Like, I work, week to week. And she basically talks about that pressure as a performer, that you do have these horrific things happening behind you and you still have to get up and perform.
Yeah, and it makes all those other kinds of pressure to be funny seem so trivial all of a sudden.
Yes, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The back and forth and putting people on the spot. But that's a very good segue into what I wanted to talk about, which is, and we've spoken about the pressure to be funny in lighthearted environments, but what about the pressure to be funny when you're actually a talk show host and conducting serious interviews? And I think that it's also, and I can speak to that as a journalist, and obviously I'll have questions for you, more questions for you about having to be funny all the time. Do we really have to be funny all the time? Do we have to be funny in the workplace when we're doing a presentation, when there's a meeting, when there's an introduction of someone? Do we always have to bring comedy into those things? But journalism is what I wanted to, focus on for a couple of minutes, because I was going back to some interviews, and definitely we've been referencing interview styles and some interviews that go well and some that don't. And you mentioned Ellen at the beginning of our episode today. I see comedy as completely fine, so long as it doesn't get in the way of the purpose of a talk show host being an interviewer as well. And I know well enough that all of these people who are talk shows, if you think about Jennifer Hudson and Kelly Clarkson, Ellen DeGeneres, whether they're singers, actors, comedy, stand-up comics, they are not journalists. There is an art to interviewing. There is a back and forth. There is a conversation style and a skill that is very specific to interviewing.
Absolutely. And I think they're different talk shows too. So the audience of Drew Barrymore or Kelly Clarkson expect something different from an audience. I'm not saying the audiences are different necessarily, but the audiences are watching for different things. So, someone watching Kelly Clarkson is probably expecting different things to someone watching, or who used to watch Michael Parkinson, a British interviewer who could go between comedy and seriousness.
Yes.
And I mean, we can talk about interview styles, because you're right. I think, the contrast I find between someone like Graham Norton, English talk show host, and someone like Drew Barrymore, Kelly Clarkson, even Oprah, is Graham Norton interviews in a journalistic way, in that the interviews are about the guests. He doesn't say, like, there is nothing we know about Graham Norton's life, really. Like, we can read about it, but he doesn't give much away when he's interviewing about himself.
And I'm fine with not knowing.
Correct.
And I love Graham Norton. I wasn't,
No, absolutely. But you watch a Kelly Clarkson, a Drew Barrymore, a Jennifer Hudson, and Ellen DeGeneres, they bring themselves into those stories. And I think they do that to try and, I don't know.
And they do that, but I have a counterexample for you, because so living in the States, obviously I see all of those shows. I watch them out of curiosity sometimes, very much depending on the guest. Kylie Minogue was on the Jennifer Hudson show a few weeks ago. Kylie Minogue is it's the American era of Kylie Minogue's
Yes.
career. So
Love
obviously she's all over the place here, which I find incredible. It was long overdue that she's getting all of her flowers here. But then watching the interview with Jennifer Hudson, you could actually see that for me, who's been a fan of Kylie Minogue since 1988, there wasn't much I was going to learn from that interview by
Right.
Jennifer Hudson of Kylie Minogue. So that was about the audience. But I want to talk about The View, which is a panel show with Whoopi
Oh,
Goldberg and Joy
but
Behar.
Yes, but can I just come back to Jennifer Hudson? I saw her
Yes.
interview Snoop Dogg, and we learned how many kids and grandkids he had.
Well, I think,
You know, like,
yeah, so I see what you mean there. But then Kamala Harris was on The View maybe it's been a couple of months now, or even at the beginning of 2024. Kamala Harris was on The View. She was kind of interviewed, but it felt so staged. There was no back and forth. There was
right.
no, I ask you a question, you answer something, and then, we have it a bit of back and forth because I want clarifications. It was just Whoopi asking a question, Joy asking a question, Sunny asking a question, Alyssa asking a question.
Yes.
So it felt so staged and so unnatural.
Because no one would put a vice president of America on a talk show with questions without notice. So that would have been, those questions would, I don't work in the American political system, but I'm pretty confident in guessing those questions would have been tested. They would have been vetted. Because what they would also be thinking of is not the interview as a context, but a sound bite out of those interviews. And Veep is an excellent show to watch on where sound bites can go wrong and be taken out of context. So that interview, there would have been nothing left for chance. So it would have looked like, isn't this great? Kamala Harris is going on this talk show. But that would have been manufactured and choreographed within an inch of its life.
I want to talk about Kylie Minogue appearing on the Ellen DeGeneres show in 2000 and I'm thinking 2009. I don't remember the date exactly. Kylie Minogue went off script during that interview. And it was a very interesting moment to witness because that's when you could actually tell that Ellen DeGeneres was not a journalist at all. And then, there was no real interviewing skills. So Kylie Minogue appeared to promote her album X, which was the first studio album that she released after battling breast cancer. So she came up on that show, performed a song, and then had a short interview with Ellen, who had just minutes before interviewed Hillary Clinton. So Kylie was on the same show as Hillary Clinton. Kylie Minogue went off script and said, very important, that she had been misdiagnosed at first, that she had seen that something was wrong, and that she had gone in to get checked for breast cancer, and she'd been misdiagnosed. The only words that Ellen uttered as a reaction to that was, wow. And there was and I heard myself say, wow, when you talked about the heckler before at the beginning of the show. And I was like, obviously I am asking you heaps of questions, but when you're taken off guard, and why are you choosing to talk about now? Like, tell us more of what happened.
Yes.
Why haven't you said it before?
Yes.
So there were so many opportunities to, dig a little deeper, but also that is the problem with all these talk shows here is that they are so timed that you do not have an extra 20 seconds for that additional snippet of information because you have to go to a commercial break. So there is no spontaneity in those exercises anymore. And I found that moment to be so revealing of also what artists have to put themselves through to actually sustain a presence, particularly, I think, in the United States, because you were mentioning Graham Norton, whose style has changed because we've seen him at the beginning of, the career of his Graham Norton show be kind of a little meaner than he became afterwards and being all about, and I'll go, so it's only a short stretch from Kylie Minogue to Danny Minogue, and we're going to get to that in a second. But just to wrap up on Kylie, I think it's, and Ellen, it takes, I don't know if these people go through training to actually be good interviewers. And it's not all about the repartee. It's also
No,
about being able to sustain a conversation and get some information.
it is, yes. And as you're talking, I'm thinking that I don't think Ellen's a very good listener. Ellen doesn't listen to well, I don't think Ellen ever really listened to the responses of their guests. They were too busy thinking about the next gag and the next joke and the next hitting the mark sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think with the Kylie Minogue thing, I remember you telling me that, and I haven't seen it, but I was absolutely, aghast at it because, to open up with that personal information, but to stand in Ellen's shoes, Ellen has a light-hearted daytime talk show with a certain purpose, and her guests come for a certain reason and her viewers tune in for a certain reason. So when your guest then takes you into a very serious, down a serious path, I can understand why Ellen couldn't elaborate on from a kind of an event and MC and PR point of view. I think it's bad PR that Ellen just washed over it. But I can actually, to play devil's advocate, see why Ellen couldn't expand that interview, because that is not the style of show. And so you'd actually
there's entertainment talk
tuning.
shows. There's entertainment talk shows, and there are informative talk shows.
And that's what I was saying about audiences tuning in to Jennifer Hudson for a certain reason. Audiences
how
tuning
different
in to
are they, though?
Parkinson.
At the end of the day, how different are they in what they allow? I mean, obviously, on The View, the tone is a little different, but could Kamala Harris, is it that different if you had her on the Jennifer Hudson show or if you had her on? I mean, Ellen interviewed most of the, leaders and probably Michelle Obama and all those people as well.
But I watch a talk show for a certain reason. So I watch a show because I need some light relief, or I want to know, I want to go a bit deeper and heavier into world's issues. So don't come on it's like a sitcom when they do a serious storyline. It doesn't always work. So
yeah.
I'm watching Ellen because she's funny. And I mean, back in the day, I used to love Ellen. It's only kind of as time's gone on. And
you mean you don't like her anymore?
It's crazy, I know. I mean, we can talk about her and her comeback to stand up and her pushback in the last week, her pushback about why she was cancelled.
Yeah, go ahead.
But I was just going to say, I can see why she couldn't expand that interview, because people don't come to the Ellen DeGeneres show for, and I know you can say, well, she has, certain topics about, giving her money away to people going through some pretty hard times, but the context of the show and the preface of the show, it's lighthearted. So I can.
It does look like a missed. It does look like a missed opportunity just to get. I mean, it wasn't going to be if they weren't going to break into exclusive coverage.
No, I know.
think they kind of. I think there was a missed opportunity there of. It was more revealing of something than it was, kind of a terrible interview. It kind of showed that it takes a certain set of skills to actually, even if it's just for one sentence or, one additional bit of information, to kind of go there and be able to capture the moment.
Yes. I'm going to put it back on Kylie, though. Did she bring that up on the wrong show?
Oh, I think she just went for it. No, she referenced, and this is becoming a longer conversation than I thought. No, but Kylie Minogue actually said, I wouldn't have said anything if I hadn't heard Hillary Clinton in the first part of the show. Okay. So she did that in reaction to what Hillary Clinton had said in her segment. And I tried to piece it back together, getting the different bits of the interviews on YouTube, but it's not one that is widely available.
No.
So,
because I think of your favorite show and one that I can't stand, which is Andy Cohen's What Happens Live, which just to me is like everyone yelling at me and neon lights flashing, and I know you enjoy it. But if, that show to me, he doesn't, I don't know, does he go into, I'm trying to think, what if Kylie had brought that up on Watch What Happens Live or on Graham Norton Like,
I
you know,
think,
if
can
on
I just
different
say,
shows,
it takes a good interviewer to interview the Real Housewives. I I've got to
oh,
say, just so
can I
let me
just
carry on.
quote?
Let me carry on for a sec about that. So it takes a good interviewer to interview the Real Housewives. I watch what happens live depending on the guests. 80% of the guests, I have no idea who they are because they're
Yes,
what we call Bravo celebrities. So
yes,
they're people on different reality shows on Bravo, which I don't watch. The only one I actually watch that I watch two, The Real Housewives of Beverly Hills and The Real Housewives of Dubai.
of
They're
course.
the Having lived in Dubai, I have to
Yes.
watch that one. So I watch those two shows. I mean, I've seen Andy Cohen do interviews in other kind of environments, and he's hosted with Anderson Cooper, actually, who's kind of a legitimate, he's the
Yes,
real deal if you think
yes.
about it. So they've done shows together. I
Well,
think, and
they've done New Year's Eve
they have
television
done New
together where
Year's
Andy
Eve.
Cohen gets drunk and there's a
Yeah.
whole thing between them. Yes.
That's right. So, um, look, I absolutely understand what you're saying about the different styles. I just think about the fact that still um, interviewing is a specific set of skills.
Yes. I'm going to come back to, I want to move on to a Graham Norton quote I've got here because I think it's really interesting, but I want to go back to that Andy Cohen one, and we could do a whole episode. I know we keep saying we could do all these episodes. Let's not take away from the fact how invested in Bravo and the Real Housewives franchise Andy Cohen is. I mean, he's basically the orchestrator of it all.
He's the producer.
He's the producer, and I'm not going to say he's the manipulator of it all, but there's certainly a lot that comes out around how he almost pitches some of those housewives against each other and helps create those characters. So I think
I
it's
choose to believe that it's 100% real.
say that again.
I choose to believe that it's 100% real.
Absolutely, absolutely. But just talking about Graham Norton, because I like his interviewing style, and I do often watch it going, gosh, he never makes it about him. You know, and we know that he does his research, and they do test couch scenarios with his producers who've done all their mini interviews with the guests. So, you know, he's got a loose outline for how the show is going to flow, but obviously it goes awry. And he was talking about guests coming on and not being funny. And he said,
Mm-hmm.
you know, you have this situation, but he says there's the guest sitting on the couch thinking, but I love this show. Tonight, just, I don't know, it's just not that good tonight. And you're like, because you're on it, because you're here, you're ruining it. So people think
You talking about Robert De Niro?
that could be. No, I think he's talking about a few in general. He says
Okay.
it happens quite often where people are like, normally this show is fun. And I was like, yeah, but you're here, you know, you kill every room you go in. And so that whole sort of idea that, well, if I go on a funny show, I'm going to be funny. And I had noticed this, and then he goes on to say this, that it was, so this article references, it's the fear of a glum A-lister, which prompted the regular booking of a comedian. So they often, you know, at the end of the couch have the British comedian or an American comedian or...
They aren't always funny either.
No, they're not, but
It
what Graham
feels
Norton said
forced
is...
sometimes.
Yes, but he said that that is the joy. You know, if I'm getting nothing, I can kind of turn to the comedian who can probably do a 20-minute set on the couch.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a safety net. And you can see that as his shows evolve, that you get this regular comedian. And you know, it's the Jack Whitehalls, it's the Greg Davies.
Yeah, but
Jack a few regulars that go on there.
Jack Whitehall sometimes uses bits from his show as answers to Graham's questions. So that feels a bit staged as well.
Yes.
I'm
not going to say it's perfect, but I just thought you can see that evolve because Graham Norton's got a pressure for the audience to laugh.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he's kind of
absolutely.
reputation, so it's hard.
And it used to be at the expense of other people, and sometimes people who weren't there.
That's
so if
right.
I mentioned Miriam Margolyes's reference of Winona Ryder in the previous show when she called her the shoplifter, which to this day I'm still shocked about. But what about Graham Norton asking Sharon Osbourne about what was going on with Danny Minogue's face. And that was at a time, since then, Danny's come out and said that it was a horrible time in her life and that she just wanted to get rid of whatever expressions her faces could actually demonstrate and show. And if you think about what was going on, so here is Graham asking Sharon Osbourne, who isn't the biggest Danny fan, and off Sharon goes. And David Boreanaz, who's sitting next to her, has no idea what's going on. And I found that segment still, I mean, still to this day, it kind of, I find it so painful to watch considering what we learned about Danny and what she was going through at that time. And again, I'm thinking, why is Kylie still going on Graham Norton's show, considering how he treated her sister? And also, has Graham ever, I mean, Sharon won't, but has Graham ever apologized about that to anyone? And if he hasn't, and once again, it goes back to what I was saying last time. If you're going to be offensive, mean to someone in a particular forum, you should apologize to them in that very same forum. Don't do it behind closed door or send her a message after the show. Just if that's what I call an apology.
Absolutely. Do you think, and I'm not saying this makes it right, do you think that, and we talk about the pressure to, make people laugh, and we talk about it's the early years of Graham Norton where he is meaner. Do you think that's an insecurity, and you get the cheap laughs by making quips at people? Do you think that's, and I'm not saying that makes it right, but I just wonder, is it an inexperience? Is it, he's got the confidence now, he actually doesn't have to do that. But I mean, it just felt, that whole episode just feels like a really bitchy little comment.
Yeah, and I mean, Sharon Osbourne is very polarizing. So whatever comes out of her mouth, some people are going to interpret in a certain way, and some people are going to interpret in, the opposite way. I just didn't think, it wasn't even a question. It was just, here it is. I'm passing on the topic to you, and go ahead and do and say whatever you want to do.
But it's interesting, isn't it? Because in the last episode where you were talking about Miriam Margolyes having to go at Winona Ryder, I've seen that episode a million times. I actually don't take it as an attack on Winona Ryder. She talks about the age of innocence, that basically the studio put Winona Ryder forward for the award. I can see you not disagreeing.
Not agreeing.
Yeah. But so I actually don't watch that and say, oh gosh, she's been mean to Winona Ryder. I actually know that the way these studios work, that they only put certain people forward in certain categories. To me, Miriam Margolyes is having to go at that process. And of course, it's an easy shot to make a joke against Winona Ryder. But I'm going to throw back to you to a quip on Graham Norton that you often talk about to me. And I want your take on this, because we talk about Graham Norton making a mean comment about Danny or Miriam Margolyes. So we've got Rihanna and Helena Bonham Carter on the couch, and I can see you laughing. And we've got Cate Blanchett and Sandra Bullock, and they're promoting Ocean's 13, 14, the female one. Ocean's again.
Ocean's 8.
Ocean's 8, I don't know. There's a million oceans. One of the oceans. They're promoting that film, which, of course, was the all-female sort of version of Oceans.
That's right.
Helena Bonham Carter is wearing a dress that they joke about earlier in the show because it looks like it's got phallic symbols on it. And then move along.
Penises, if you will.
Sorry?
Penises, if you will.
Penises, if you will. These are four friends. They've acted together. They seem to have a really good rapport. They fast forward and they're talking about the Met Gala because, of course, Rihanna has been many times in very iconic dresses. And so Graham's talking about the pressure of the Met Gala, and Helena Bonham Carter says, I've never been to the Met Gala. And the other three say, haven't you? And she said, no, I've never been invited. And Rihanna says, because you wear dresses
that's because you wear dresses like that.
Yes. So how does that attack to get a laugh differ from, obviously one difference is she's saying it to the person. She's not saying it. But let's say Helena Bonham Carter doesn't have a stylist. We know she has she has out there dress sense, so she doesn't make sort of any bones. But let's just, assume she's really conscious that she doesn't get the designers sending her the clothes. She's really self-conscious about going on Grey Norton, what's she going to wear, and then she gets a quip from Rihanna like that. How does that sit in the kind of family of insults?
I mean, look, they were all kind of sitting next to each other, the closest we'd ever seen anyone, sit on a couch. Literally, Helena Bonham Carter was almost, kind of her head on Rihanna's shoulder. Like I think that you could actually see that those five were kind of a tight group.
Yes.
I'm not taking anything away from the comment, but they went for Rihanna as well. Like they made fun of her Met Gala outfits and that long dress that looks like a pizza and all of that. So
but she also
I think
made fun of it too. She talked about the yellow situation.
The yellow situation, absolutely. So the omelet. So they actually, look, I hadn't really thought about that because, I mean, Helena just bursts out laughing as well in that segment.
But maybe she does that because,
you laugh it off. I absolutely agree with you. Sometimes you laugh it off. You laugh it off and then you kind of, I mean, I'm still, there's instances of me finding myself in a professional situation. And I was talking about, and that's a good segue into, do we have to be funny all the time? Do we have to bring humor into everything? I was working on an event where big presentations were going to happen and everyone was going to get together because we were working in different cities and all. And I ended up, everyone was going to be introduced in a funny way. And we all became kind of like cartoon characters.
Yes.
And it became this very stereotypical thing of, one looking like a womanizer, the other one looking like, I don't want to go into too personal stuff, but it was very much a caricature that I kind of laughed off at the beginning because of everything that I had integrated as being acceptable for me. And looking back now, I don't find those things acceptable anymore.
No.
And so I kind of laughed it off back then as a joke. But to feel that years later, that thing is still sitting somewhere in my brain. And I was talking to a friend about it, going, these are some of the things that have happened to me that I wish hadn't. You kind of realize that there are some things that you used to laugh off because you had integrated that they were acceptable. And then as you grow older, realize that they're not anymore.
Oh, gosh, yes. And that actually segues, we didn't plan this, but that perfectly segues into a quote I want to wrap up with from Hannah Gadsby around self-deprecating humour. And for anyone who doesn't know Hannah Gadsby, they're a comedian from Tasmania, which is a small state of Australia, and they did a comedy special on Netflix called Nanette, which I think was their grandma, and they share personal anecdotes around life as a lesbian and gender non-conforming person, or non-binary, in a small town Tasmania. And I'll just read this bit because it plays exactly into what you just said. So this article talks about to deal with their social inequality because they lived in an environment and in a community where they were surrounded by people who believed they had license to hate on others. So they, and of course, being a young age, LGBTQ community, they were a target. And so this references, they said, to deal with the social inequality they faced. And so this is talking about the context of Nanette and what Hannah Gadsby talks through. Gadsby says that they turned to self-deprecating humour. They realised the self-deprecating humour common to stand-up comedy is doubly painful for marginalised people because it adds another voice to the chorus of people who already insult and belittle them, which I just think is so powerful. So in essence, and talking back to your skit that, that you had to do, that the stuff that you're trying to fight back against, you actually make yourself part of the joke to be almost accepted, and then that adds power to the people who've been hating on you to start with and getting the laugh out of you. And I remember
Actually, it was a video presentation where our heads were superimposed on characters.
Yes.
But same thing.
But
Absolutely.
it's very powerful, that pressure to laugh. So, and we talked about previously, I do think it's more in females and perhaps non-binary comedians that this self-deprecating humour, you know, we're talking down to ourselves, but we take on what society has already kind of instilled in us about why we're, you know, why we are kind of the butt of a joke or something like that. And then, I mean, that Nanette special really hit me. I mean, it's the most powerful, not only storytelling, but a lesson in stand-up and a lesson in storytelling, because Hannah Gadsby actually talks through the process of stand-up, of when you have that tense moment in a joke and then what you do to create that release for the audience to laugh. But what if you don't create that release? And what if you make that audience sit in that tension of the joke, which is often a personal anecdote? So for you, you never got to actually have the release in the joke because it's a personal anecdote in life. Yes. So I'm going to end on that for our comedy special.
I think it's a great way to end it. We probably have heaps more to say about this topic, and we might further down the line. But yeah, this is the perfect way to end it.
That's right. Thank you. There's so many things we can talk about. I mean, Mindy Kaling's talked about being a female in a writer's, you know, in an all-male writer's room and what that's like. Julia Louise-Dreyfus talks about how horrendous her experience on SNL was. She was on there for 3 years, absolutely hated it. Met Larry David, who was having a miserable time on SNL as well. And then they obviously joined forces with Seinfeld. But I had read a quote from an SNL writer, which, you know, I don't know this writer, so there could be some bias, but they actually said, and it wasn't when Lorne, I'm trying to think of the famous SNL guy that everyone, it was a hiatus for him. So it was not the heyday. There was, I think, the kind of the director or the producer, they say he walked around with a baseball bat, but I don't know if that's a metaphor or he actually did that. But this writer said they couldn't work out where Julia just couldn't, her humour couldn't fit. So when she went to Seinfeld, they said it was the same humour, SNL. They couldn't work out, and he's not saying this against Julia. I think they're actually saying it against themselves. They didn't know how to bring her humour and her style and her genius into the show. So I found that really interesting, that a comedian can work in one format but can't work in another.
We all have to find our little niche, don't we?
We've got to find our niche. So that wraps up our Pressure to Laugh.
That was a good one.
That's episode 4. I think it's episode 4.
Yeah.
Now we move on to. I feel like I feel like I'm Alan, not knowing how to segue from that serious Hannah Gadsby kind of quote into suddenly moving on to the next thing.
Well, we don't really need a segue for that segment. We just let it happen.
It's such a serious kind of thing that hits you in the heart. But there's so much we could talk about comedians, but we're going to talk about, I still feel like I'm really flippant, just segueing to the next thing, but we're going to talk about our pop culture moment of the week.
Yes, we are. I'm very curious about yours because you haven't said anything about it, so I wouldn't know.
Do you want me to go
So
first?
Who's starting? Is it me?
You start, yes.
Okay. Well,
I'd like to have the last word.
And it's absolutely fine with me. So my pop culture moment of the week actually ties in with a few of the mentions in the episode today. Madonna's tour is wrapping up with a gigantic concert. I will not be attending. But look, it's been, I mean, to think that Madonna was in a coma a few months ago and that she's made it back to the stage and has performed all around the world, just postponing one segment of the tour and then coming back. I've been following it on socials. Madonna has, and I think the reviews have been incredible, particularly in Europe. It's just incredible to see that she's still bringing people together, and still shaking off anything that's thrown at her from, you know, the naysayers and the you know, the everyone who's got an opinion about her. And to feel that so many people have actually pulled for her, I think was absolutely beautiful to witness. And I'm going to throw it back to one moment on the tour that I'd been waiting for 20 years, which is Kylie Minogue and Madonna finally appearing on stage together. It was long overdue. It was at one of the shows in California. Um, and if you think about the story that those two have had together without really meeting ever, I'm just going to give you a super quick timeline. So Madonna had been around for 5 years when Kylie Minogue became the singer that we know. And Kylie kind of filled a void because that kind of happened at the time before Madonna released Like a Prayer. So there was no huge, you know, pop singer out there, the likes of Madonna. And Kylie was always compared to Madonna, not the other way around, but she never really posed a threat to Madonna, let's be honest. And when Kylie started to emancipate from the hit factory with Better the Devil You Know, that video, whatever Kylie says, that video featuring the spaghetti strap dress and the flames in the background, it is a reference to Like a Prayer. You can tell me as much as you want that it's not, it is. And obviously Kylie's tour, let's get to it, tour drawing comparisons with Blonde Ambition, the fashion components. Kylie worked with John Galliano, Madonna had worked with Gaultier. Look, and then I think musically the moment when they were most alike was kind of like during the Impossible Princess and Ray of Light era, because there was that very, the atmosphere behind those two records kind of felt a little bit the same. And then at the 2000 MTV Europe Music Awards, Madonna comes out wearing a Kylie Minogue t-shirt.
Yes.
So that was kind of the moment where Kylie got the seal of approval from Madonna. What people don't probably know, though, and I'm going to be very quick with this.
I know, I'm watching our time.
The first musical moment between a Minogue and Madonna actually came with Danny. Because Danny had a song, Don't Want to Lose This Feeling, that she remixed incorporating into the groove, the song by Madonna. And that happened in 2003, I'm thinking. So very powerful moment because Madonna had never given permission for anyone to use her work. And Danny was able to use Into the Groove. And then Madonna's always kind of supported Kylie from a distance. When Kylie was diagnosed with breast cancer, Madonna publicly expressed her support. And so those two had a story of kind of never being in the same place at once. Madonna wanted Kylie to be on stage during her Rebel Heart tour in 2015, you know, in Sydney, but Kylie wasn't around, never happened, and it finally happened this year. I'm really cutting it short. We'll come back to this.
You are. This is just
to anyone.
This is
to anyone who's just, you know, been a fan of those two, seeing them together was quite the moment. And Madonna kind of wrapping up her tour in Rio with what is anticipated to be 1 million people showing up on Copacabana Beach.
Well, my event management head just goes into
yes,
things, toilets, getting people in and out, bag checks.
But if I can just add
of moving 1 million people around.
That's right. But if I can just add one thing about Kylie and Madonna on stage together, felt so special because it was a moment that was much more than just the sum of its parts.
Of course.
You know, just Kylie and Madonna
absolutely.
coming together.
Yes.
Thank you. Go now.
Okay. You got your Madonna and your Kylie Minogue reference in. It only took until episode 4, but we will do a longer episode on that. Well, my pop culture moment features Melissa McCarthy and Barbara Streisand this week. And I think it's got so many layers. So Melissa McCarthy, and actually just tying into this week's episode, Melissa McCarthy came through Groundlings, which I talked about before, and I've heard Dax Shepard talk about, and Dax Shepard, who came through Groundlings, I mean, Kristen Wiig came through Groundlings, a lot of people on the West Coast came through the Groundlings improv group, and I've heard Dax Shepard talk about how bizarre it was for them all to then see Melissa McCarthy playing a pretty straight character on Gilmore Girls, because they came through a comedy troupe with her where they all knew she was
hilarious.
Yes, to then watch her in a quite a straight role in a show. But he said, but we know that's what show business is. You take what roles you can get. And it was amazing that she was on this primetime show, but not in the genre that they knew her for. So for those of you who don't know, Melissa McCarthy posted a photo on X, formerly known as Twitter, where she said pastels. She's in a green pastel. Her companion is in sort of a light pink pastel suit. She says pastels only to honour the incredible Matthew Bourne at the CTGLA gala last night with this fella, Adam Shankman. And then she makes another little quip. Barbara Streisand, actual Barbara Streisand, writes, "Give him my regards. Did you take Ozempic?" Which, of course, is the weight loss drug. As you can imagine, everyone jumps on board, understandably, because that is quite a comment to make. Barbara Streisand has since released a statement on X saying, "OMG, I went on Instagram to see the photos we'd posted of the beautiful flowers I'd received for my birthday. Below, I mean, it's all completely random, her statement. Below them was a photo of my friend Melissa McCarthy, who I sang with on my Encore album. She looked fantastic, exclamation mark. I wanted to pay her a compliment. I forgot the world is reading." I mean, there's so many layers there because, A, you know how to use social media. Don't tell me you have done this by mistake. Asking her if she's taken Ozempic, I don't know if that is a compliment. And she doesn't, I don't think that's actually an apology in there. Melissa McCarthy has since released a video on Instagram where, and I'll just get it up, so she's dressed in florals. She's holding got to find it. She's holding a Funny Girl, I think it is. She's holding a magazine celebrating Barbara Streisand. The caption is at Barbara Streisand. So she tags Barbara Streisand fan club members only. And in the video, she basically says, the fact Barbara Streisand actually knows who I am. She reached out to me. She said I looked good. There's nothing, like this couldn't get better. There's no issue kind of thing. And I just find that whole little exchange fascinating because there's some PR crisis management happening there.
Damage control.
McCarthy feels she's got to come out and say to her people, stop, heaping on Barbara Streisand. But, I mean, I think Barbara Streisand comment was really, I don't know. Yeah. Look, if I could imagine that's a comment between maybe friends that, someone's working out, they're losing weight, you might go, oh, you're taking Ozempic as a joke between friends because you knew, they wouldn't, like you would only make that joke if you definitely knew they weren't taking it. But Melissa McCarthy's basically come out and said she knows who I am. It doesn't sound like they're very close friends.
Mm.
So to make that comment, even if it was a private comment, to someone you're not close friends with, and from Barbara Streisand, who the world sort of holds up on this pedestal, it was so off-brand for Barbara Streisand, and I just find the whole exchange fascinating.
I think it's fascinating because, Barbara Streisand is a lady of few words. I mean,
yes.
her autobiography aside, because it's like 1,000 pages.
Yes.
But, I mean, she doesn't give a lot of interviews. She kind of keeps to herself. So for her to come out, I mean, look, it is, at the end of the day, what really matters is how really Melissa McCarthy took it. And will we ever know how many spin doctors were,
Correct.
pulling strings behind the scenes? I'm not quite sure.
And and will we ever know actually how Melissa McCarthy felt about that comment? Because she then has to come out. Well, she doesn't.
Does she know how she feels right now? Maybe she won't feel the same in a few years. I mean, that's what we've been talking about, revisiting situations and making light of them on the spot and then realizing that it affected you much more than you would have realized when it happened.
And it almost goes back to that self-deprecating humour that she's been the butt of a comment, but then she has to kind of be the one to sort of say, no, I'm fine.
And just for our listeners, Ozempic is a type 2 diabetes
Oh, yeah, sorry, I shouldn't say it's a weight loss
no,
drug.
it has been it is being used for weight loss, but at
Exactly.
first it was brought onto the market as a type 2 diabetes
That's right.
drug.
Yes.
So
I think that brings us to the end. And if you're still listening, we thank you, because this has been a
we
big
thank
episode.
you. Oh, absolutely. Well, we covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
Mhm.
So you're Vicken Kukli, joining us from the United States of America.
That's right. And you're Georgie Statius, joining us from Melbourne, Australia.
I am. So I'm going to bid you farewell. I'm going to say I wish you lots of laughs over the next week. I'm going to go and get another chai. You might have a cocktail, seeing it's your evening.
I actually might.
You might. And I will catch you on the next Drop It Like It's Pop.
Thank you all for listening.
This has been Drop It Like It's Pop.
Be sure to follow us on our Instagram page at Drop Like It's Pop to have access to our latest episodes and playlists.
Until next time.